One of the most common questions I get is what lens should you use for landscape photography? Now I'm going to show you exactly what it is that I use. This is not a what's in my bag video, but instead rather I'll take you through what is in my bag from my last shoot, because I've been doing landscape photography, just so you can see what lenses I take with me. However, there's a lot of photographers out there that use different lenses more than others. When I went through the EXIF information not that long ago in my Lightroom catalogue, I could see that most of my shots were definitely taken with a wide angle lens, and that is the 14 to 24mm for the Nikon, the f2.8. It could have been the 16 to 35, which I no longer have, but I did have that in the past. I used that a lot before I got this new 14 to 24, or the 10 to 20mm, I think it is, that I've got, or my 12 to 24, I can't remember what exactly, I think it's 10 to 20 actually, on the Fuji platform. That's my mirrorless camera, which is sort of like a 16 to 35 equivalent in the crop sensor of the Fuji. And so if I look at my shots, about 90% are taken with that. I then have probably an obscure lens, which I use for panoramics, which is a tilt shift that I'm going to show you. And I also have the other standards in here, like a zoom lens, but I actually don't use them very often. The number one lens, and it's always on my camera body, this is my Nikon D850. This here is the 14 to 24mm lens. Now it looks kind of bigger than it should because it's got the bracket on there for the Lee filter kit. But this lens sits on my camera pretty much all of the time, and it's my go-to lens. I absolutely love this lens, and from a landscape photographer's point of view, for me, I find getting those really wide vistas gives me the best shots, the most, I guess, the ones that are most appealing to me. And I think that's not unusual for a landscape photographer. I think most landscape photographers, or when you think of landscape photography, people will tell you to have an ultra wide angle lens. And I find that the 14 to 24 is really good. It does have its downsides. This lens is huge. As you can see, it's got a really big bulbous front end on it, and it's also heavy. So it's a heavy lens. It sort of, makes the camera a little less balanced, but most of my shooting is on a tripod. So that's probably my main baby there that I rely on all of the time. The lens that I then use the second most of all is one that's a little bit obscure, and I think people find it a bit strange that I actually have a tilt shift lens. Now this is a 45mm tilt shift lens. It's a Nikon lens. They call it, I think, PC, which is perspective control. And typically this was used in architecture. So if you ever do buildings and you point your camera up to get the entire building in your shot, you'll notice that the building actually leans into the shot. So it looks like it's leaning forward and gets narrower towards the top. The other thing they're very well known for is that miniature looking photography. So if you shoot from up at a height and you use the tilt function, you get those two out of focus bands, and it makes everything look like a miniature scale model, and they're really well known for that. What they're less known for actually though is panoramic photography, and that's what I use it for. And so with these lenses, what you can do, and if you haven't seen my videos on shooting these panoramic images before, then you can have a look. But what you can do is you can actually shift these lenses left and right. So you can get the back there and you can slide it to the left and right. So what I do is I put it on the camera and I will shift it all the way to the left and take one shot. I'll shift it all the way to the right and take one shot, and then I've got enough data there for a really nice panoramic image. And I haven't had to move my camera head at all, and I don't lose any of the data when I crop because it's two big 36 megapixel files, because that's, well, now it's obviously out of the D850, it's 46 megapixel files. So you end up with a really huge file for your photography. So they're my two main ones. Now I do have some other obvious lenses in here. This is the 24 to 70. I actually don't use this very much. I've just started using it more, and the reason for that was you saw this big filter on the front of this lens here for the Lee filter kit. These threads are 77mm threads, which is what you'll normally find on most lenses, as where this is like a really weird filter kit that only fits this particular mount. And up until recently, I didn't have an adapter to make it fit these because I wasn't using these much, or I wasn't planning to use these much. Since I've bought the adapter, I've actually used this a fair bit, the 24 to 70 for some of my landscapes, because I actually really enjoy getting in that little bit closer, and I'm starting to really appreciate that. One of the benefits of zooming in a bit closer is you sort of compress the scene a little bit, and it can work really well. This is the 24 to 70 2.8, really good lens, very commonly used by wedding photographers and portrait photography, but there's no reason why you can't use it in landscape. And it's good. I mean, whilst the wide angle thing is the main thing to do, everyone puts their wide angle lens on, and if you only had one lens that you could use, that'd be the one that I'd get, but it's good to have some options. The other one that I've got in here is my 70 to 200 zoom lens, and I use this even less frequently. This is probably the less used lens in my entire kit. but I have it with me because sometimes you'll be somewhere where you're shooting a landscape and you'll see something that's awesome, some awesome detail in the distance, and you can really zoom in and grab it. And this lens is super sharp and just works really nicely. But once again, it's quite a heavy lens. So by the time you have all of this into one bag, it becomes quite heavy. They're all the lenses I've got in here, and it becomes quite a heavy kit to cart around. But if you want to get somewhere and know that you've got the lens for the job, you've got to carry them all around. So in summary, what lens, if you were going to do landscape photography, what lens would I recommend you use? Well, first of all, if you could only buy one lens and afford one lens, get yourself a wide angle lens. You know, the 14 to 24 millimeter is quite expensive, and that's because it's the f2.8 and it has hardly any distortion. So it's really, really popular, but it's also an expensive lens. A good other option, if you're a Nikon shooter in particular, is the 16 to 35. Now, Canon also have the 16 to 35. They also have now brought out an ultra wide angle, because up until a few years ago they didn't, and Canon shooters had to buy this Nikon lens and get an adapter to make it work. But now you have that option as well with Canon. But you know, there's also third-party lenses. I know Tokina makes lenses, Sigma makes lenses, so there's lots of different manufacturers that make wide-angle lenses. So just buy the best you can afford with the budget you've got, and your wide-angle lens will be the first go-to lens in most cases for landscape photography. My second choice then for you would probably be something like a 24 to 70. And same thing again, there's a lot of third-party companies out there that make great lenses. I know Sigma make one, Tamron make one, and they're great lenses. So you don't have to go for this Nikon glass, especially if it's not going to be your main lens that you use. The other lens that's not in here that I sometimes bring with me is my macro lens, and that's another lens that I would consider getting before I went out and got a telephoto lens. Now it depends. Let's say you like wildlife, well then you probably make your third lens a telephoto lens and your macro would be your fourth lens. But you know, if you're asking the question, what lens should I get for landscape photography? It's definitely would be a wide angle lens. Now, if you've enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Give it a thumbs up. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, hit the little notification bell. That way you'll never miss out on a video, and get out there and take some photos.